A wealthy man noticed a young girl crying on the rain-soaked streets and decided to bring her to his home. But soon after, he was shocked to realize that the girl had an extremely special connection with him. The city was alive with the hustle of late afternoon, a blur of hurried footsteps and focused expressions. But among the rushing crowd, one small figure stood out. Not for her movement, but for her stillness. Emma, just 8 years old, was curled up against the cold stone wall of a tall building. Her big brown eyes, framed by a dirty and thin face, watched as people hurried past. She wore a mismatched set of faded, worn-out clothes that barely clung to her fragile body, weakened by hunger. Her tangled black hair hung over her bony shoulders, covered only by a frayed jacket, and her bare, grimy feet, roughened from walking the unforgiving city streets, told of a difficult life. Why doesn't anyone see me? She wondered, sadness far beyond her years weighing in her thoughts. Do they even notice me, or am I just another part of the sidewalk? Holding a piece of stale bread close to her chest, her only food for the day gifted by a kind lady earlier, she hesitated to eat it. Her stomach rumbled, but something held her back. She scanned the crowd, searching for someone who might need it more than she did. Then she noticed a young mother nearby, just as dirty and poorly dressed as she was, holding a crying baby. The woman looked as lost and desperate as Emma felt. Maybe I can make someone happy today. Even if I can't be happy myself, Emma whispered. Gathering her strength, she slowly rose to her feet, her thin legs trembling. Every step felt like a battle against her hunger and exhaustion. People walked past her, not sparing her a second glance, as if she were invisible. Eventually, she reached the woman who looked at her with surprise and uncertainty. Without saying a word, Emma offered her the piece of bread. With tears in her eyes, the woman hesitated, then took it. "Thank you, little one. You're an angel sent from heaven," she said, her voice full of emotion. Even though her stomach protested loudly, Emma felt warmth in her heart. She watched as the mother broke the bread to feed the baby, who instantly stopped crying. For a moment, Emma forgot her hunger, finding joy in the small act of helping someone else. Even if people ignore me, I can still make a difference, she thought, a faint smile appearing on her face. I want to be a light, even in the darkness. Mom always said to be kind, no matter what. Thinking of her mother sent a wave of longing through her. It had been 3 months since her mother passed away, 3 long months of surviving on the harsh streets. Each day felt like a battle against hunger, the cold, and overwhelming loneliness. As if matching her emotions, the sky turned dark, heavy clouds gathering overhead. Thunder rumbled, and Emma flinched. People around her picked up their pace, trying to find shelter from the coming storm. "Oh no, where will I go?" Emma whispered as the rain began to fall, first in light drops, then turning into a heavy downpour. She ran, her bare feet slipping on the wet pavement, desperately seeking cover. But every doorway was locked and every entry blocked. People rushed past, leaving her alone as the street emptied. "Please, can anyone help me?" Emma cried out, her voice barely audible above the rain. "I don't want to be alone in the storm. Is there anywhere I can stay until it stops?" But her cries went unanswered, drowned out by the downpour and the indifference of the city. She huddled in a small alcove, her tears mixing with the rain as she tried to shield herself from the cold. "Mom, why did you leave me?" she sobbed softly. "Why am I alone in this huge, scary world?" Her clothes were soaked through, offering no warmth as she shivered uncontrollably. Her teeth chattered as she hugged herself, trying to find some warmth. At that moment, as the storm raged on, the city felt even more unfriendly than before. The bustling streets that had ignored her earlier now seemed even colder and harsher. She closed her eyes, trying to remember the warmth of her mother's hug, the safety of a home that now only lived in her memories. But little did Emma know that this stormy night would change everything. In the midst of darkness, a light was about to shine, setting her on a new path. On the rain-drenched avenue, a sleek car slowly drove through the storm, its headlights cutting through the heavy rain. Behind the wheel was Alexander, a man with kind eyes and the sharp look of someone used to making big decisions. He scanned the street more out of habit than intention. Suddenly, he noticed something. A small, shivering figure on the sidewalk, looking more like a frightened animal than a child. She was soaked and crying, barely able to stand. Alexander's brow furrowed as his hand instinctively gripped the steering wheel. "What's a kid doing out here, alone, in this weather?" he muttered to himself. "Is this a trap? Or should I help?" Slowing down, he kept his eyes on Emma. She was barely holding herself up, her exhaustion clear. When she looked up, their eyes met through the windshield. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in that gaze, something hauntingly familiar. "My God," Alexander gasped, his voice trembling. "Those eyes... they remind me of someone. But who? How is that possible?" With his heart pounding, he finally made up his mind. He maneuvered the car to the curb, ignoring the frustrated honks of drivers behind him. His hands shook as he unbuckled his seatbelt. The rain continued to pour, but Alexander barely noticed, his focus locked on the child who was now just a few feet away. "Hey, little one," Alexander called out, his voice nearly drowned by the storm. "Are you okay? Do you need help? Why are you alone in the rain? You don't have anywhere to go." Hearing his voice, Emma turned slowly, her large, frightened eyes fixed on Alexander. For a brief moment, she seemed ready to run, the instinctive fear of strangers kicking in. But the exhaustion and cold overtook her. With unsteady steps, she moved closer to the car. "No, I don't have a home," Emma whispered, her voice weak and trembling. "Please, sir, I just need a dry place, just until the rain stops. I promise I won't bother you." Alexander felt his heart ache. The girl's voice, so young yet filled with so much pain, hit him like a punch in the gut. He opened the car door, hesitating before gesturing invitingly. "Come on, get in," he said, trying to sound as gentle as possible. "You'll catch pneumonia if you stay out here." Emma hesitated, years of distrust fighting against her desperate need for shelter. She took one step, then another, until she was finally next to the car. Alexander could now see how much she was shivering, her lips turning blue from the cold. "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise," Alexander said softly. "I just want to help." "What's your name, little one?" Emma swallowed hard, gathering the courage. "Emma," she whispered. "My name is Emma." With those words, she finally climbed into the car, leaving a small puddle on the leather seat. Alexander quickly turned on the heater, glancing at her from the corner of his eye. Now that she was closer, the resemblance to someone from his past was even stronger. His heart raced, a mix of fear and hope rising within him. "Emma," Alexander repeated softly, as if testing the sound. "That's a beautiful name. My name is Alexander. Do you have family around here, Emma?" The girl lowered her eyes, nervously clutching the hem of her soaked t-shirt. "No, sir. I don't have anyone. I'm alone now," she replied quietly, biting her lip to hold back tears. Alexander felt a wave of emotions wash over him. Compassion, concern, and something else he couldn't quite identify. He studied Emma's face, noting the shape of her eyes and the outline of her chin. Everything seemed like an exact replica of someone he was struggling to remember. Who does this girl remind me of? Alexander thought, his heart racing. Why does she seem so familiar to me? Could this be a sign that I should take care of her? Why do I feel an urge screaming for me to protect her? But even as these thoughts flooded his mind, a voice of caution whispered, "What if I'm just imagining things?" Alexander shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. He turned to Emma, who continued to shiver despite the heater blasting. His eyes fell on her soaked clothes, dripping hair, and lips still tinged with blue from the cold. Moving quickly, he grabbed a soft blanket from the back seat and handed it to Emma. "Here, little one. Wrap yourself in this," he said gently. "It'll help you warm up faster." Emma hesitated before taking the blanket, wrapping it around herself like a protective cocoon. "Thank you, sir." "You're very kind," she mumbled, her voice still shaking. "You're someone special. Most people wouldn't care about me." Alexander gave a soft smile, a wave of protectiveness washing over him. He started the car, the windshield wipers working furiously against the relentless rain. "Well, Emma, you don't need to thank me. I think we should get out of here. You must be hungry. How about getting something to eat?" "Are you hungry?" Emma's eyes widened, a mixture of hope and wariness flashing in them. I don't want to bother you, sir. You've already done so much by getting me out of the rain," she replied nervously, biting her lip. Alexander shook his head firmly. "It's no bother at all. You need to eat, and living on the streets must be tough." As he navigated through the rain-soaked streets, he kept glancing at Emma. She seemed to relax a bit, the warmth of the car and the security of the blanket working their magic. He cleared his throat, trying to start a conversation. "So, Emma, you said you're alone. How long have you been, well, on the streets?" Emma shrank into the seat, her fingers clutching the edge of the blanket. It's been 3 months, I think," she said softly. "Since my mom—" Her voice broke, and she swallowed hard before continuing. "Since my mom was gone." Alexander's heart tightened at her words. He gripped the steering wheel, fighting the urge to pull over and hug her. I'm so sorry, Emma. That must have been very hard for you," he said gently. Emma only nodded, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "My mum was all I had. She always said that one day she would finally tell me who my father was, but—" Emma's voice trailed off, her words fading into silence. Emma's voice choked with emotion, and Alexander felt his heart skip a beat. "Your father? You don't know him?" he asked gently. Emma shook her head. "Mum said he didn't know about me, that he left the country before he knew she was pregnant." Alexander's heart sank as he listened to the girl's sad story. He was about to ask more when his cell phone rang, cutting through the tension in the car. He glanced at the caller ID. His sister Catherine's name flashed on the screen. "It's my sister. I need to take this, okay?" He explained to Emma, who looked at him curiously before nodding, shrinking further into the seat. Alexander took a deep breath and pressed the button to answer the call on speaker. "Alexander, where the hell are you?" Catherine's sharp voice filled the car. "I've been waiting for you for an hour for dinner." Alexander frowned, suddenly recalling the dinner plans. "Sorry, Catherine, I had an unexpected situation," he responded, casting a glance at Emma. "An unexpected situation? What kind of unexpected situation is more important than having dinner with your only sister?" Catherine's voice was filled with irritation. Alexander hesitated, unsure of how to explain. "It's complicated, Catherine. I found someone who needs help." There was a pause on the other end. When Catherine spoke again, her tone was suspicious. "Someone who needs help? Alexander, what have you gotten yourself into now?" "Look, I'll explain everything when I get home. I'm bringing her with me, "We'll be there in about 15 minutes, Alexander said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Her? Alexander, you better have a good explanation for this," Catherine warned, before hanging up. Alexander sighed and turned to Emma with an apologetic smile. "That was my sister, Catherine. She can be a bit intense sometimes. But don't worry, everything will be fine." Emma nodded, though Alexander could see the anxiety returning to her eyes. He reached out and gently patted her hand. "Hey, it's okay. I promise I won't let anything bad happen to you." As they pulled up to the large mansion, Emma's eyes widened in awe. "Is this where you live?" she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Alexander nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yes, this is home. Come on, let's get you inside and into some dry clothes." As they approached the front door, it swung open abruptly, revealing Catherine. She was elegantly dressed for dinner, her face set in irritation that quickly shifted to shock when she saw Emma. "Alexander, what is the meaning of this?" Catherine hissed, her eyes flashing with anger. "Who is this? This child?" she demanded, her voice dripping with disdain as she glanced at Emma. Alexander instinctively placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "Catherine, this is Emma. I found her on the street, alone in the rain. She needs our help." Catherine crossed her arms, blocking the doorway. "Have you lost your mind? You can't just bring a beggar into the house. What if she steals something? What if it's all part of some scheme?" Emma shrank back, tears welling up in her eyes. Alexander felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. "Enough, Catherine. Emma is a frightened, alone child. She's staying even if it's just for tonight. Now please, let us in." Reluctantly, Catherine stepped aside, allowing Alexander and Emma to enter. As they walked into the warmth of the house, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change dramatically. Little did he know just how right he was. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than its exterior, with a grand entrance hall and a marble staircase. Emma's eyes widened in amazement as Alexander gently guided her inside. Catherine followed closely behind, her disapproving glare never wavering. Emma's eyes scanned the walls, which were adorned with paintings and photographs, until something caught her attention. It was a large framed photograph of a graduating class. Dozens of smiling faces stared back at the camera, all dressed in caps and gowns. But one face in particular made Emma's heart race. In the center of the photo, beaming brightly, was a young woman who looked strikingly familiar. Emma's breath quickened. She looked so much like Mom, she thought, just younger, maybe a teenager. It must be a coincidence. But as she studied the photo closer, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. There, pinned to the woman's gown, was a brooch, identical to the one Emma carried in her pocket. She instinctively reached into her pocket, feeling the familiar shape of the brooch her mother had given her. Her mind swirled with questions. How is this possible? Who is this woman? Why does she have a brooch just like Mom's? Alexander noticed Emma's focus on the photograph. "Ah, that's my college graduation class. Good times back then," he commented casually, unaware of the emotional turmoil Emma was feeling. Emma just nodded, unable to find her voice. She wanted to ask about the woman in the photo, but something held her back. An instinct told her to keep her questions to herself, to not reveal too much too soon. "Come on, Emma, let's find you some dry clothes." Alexander's voice snapped her back to reality. He gently guided her away from the photograph and toward the stairs. As they climbed, Emma glanced back at the photo one last time, her heart heavy with unspoken secrets and unanswered questions. "Mom," she thought, "I miss you so much. Maybe I'm just seeing things I want to see because I wish you were here." With each step, she clutched the brooch in her pocket, a tangible link to a past she was only beginning to understand. Once upstairs, Alexander led Emma to a guest room. "You can stay here for now," he said kindly. "There are some clothes in the wardrobe that might fit you. They belong to my niece, but she outgrew them. Why don't you get changed while I talk to my sister?" Emma nodded gratefully, still too overwhelmed to speak. As Alexander left the room, she began to explore. The room was bigger than any she had ever seen, with plush carpets and ornate furniture. She opened the wardrobe and found an array of beautiful clothes, all seemingly new. As she changed into dry clothes, her mind drifted back to the photograph and the brooch. She pulled out her own brooch from her wet clothes and examined it. It was indeed identical, a delicate silver flower with a small diamond in the center. Meanwhile, downstairs, Alexander was facing an irate Catherine. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Catherine hissed. "You can't just bring a street urchin into our home." Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Catherine, she's just a child who has lost everything. We can't turn our backs on her." "And what do you plan to do? Adopt her?" Catherine's voice dripped with sarcasm. Alexander paused, the idea striking him for the first time. "I don't know, but there's something about her, Catherine. Something familiar." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, familiar?" Alexander shook his head, struggling to put his feelings into words. "I can't explain it, but when I look at her, it feels like I've known her my whole life. And her eyes, they remind me so much of..." "Of who?" Catherine pressed. "Of Ashley," Alexander whispered, the name feeling foreign on his lips after so many years. Catherine's face went pale. "Ashley? Your ex-girlfriend from college, the one who disappeared without a trace. Alexander, you can't be serious." "I know it sounds crazy," Alexander admitted, "but there's a resemblance, and the timing. Emma said her mother died 3 months ago, but she never knew her father." Catherine shook her head in disbelief. "Alexander, listen to yourself. You are creating a fantasy based on a desperate child's story. This is madness." Before Alexander could respond, they heard a small gasp from the stairs. Emma stood there, now dressed in clean clothes, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. In her hand, she clutched the brooch. You knew my mum." Emma's voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes fixed on Alexander. Alexander and Catherine exchanged shocked glances. The air in the room grew tense as the weight of Emma's words settled over them. In that moment, Alexander realized that the mystery surrounding this little girl was far deeper than he had initially thought. And as he looked into Emma's eyes so hauntingly familiar, he knew that uncovering the truth would change all their lives forever. The room fell into a tense silence as Alexander, Catherine, and Emma stared at one another. Alexander's mind raced, trying to process Emma's words. Could it be possible? Could this child really be connected to Ashley, the woman he had loved and lost so many years ago? Catherine was the first to break the silence, her voice sharp with disbelief. "This is ridiculous. Alexander, you can't possibly believe this child's story. It's obviously a ploy to manipulate you." Emma flinched at Catherine's harsh words, clutching the brooch tighter in her small hand. Alexander noticed her distress and moved to stand protectively beside her. "Catherine, please," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Emma, can you tell us more about your mother? What was her name?" Emma hesitated. Emma's eyes darted between Alexander and Catherine. "Her name was Ashley," she said softly. "Ashley Parker. She never told me much about her past, but she always said that one day she'd tell me about my father." Alexander felt as though the wind had been knocked out of him. Ashley Parker, a name he hadn't heard in years, but still carried so much weight for him. He looked at Emma, really looked at her, and suddenly the resemblance became undeniable. Those eyes, the determined set of her jaw. It was all Ashley. Catherine, however, was unconvinced. "This is ridiculous," she scoffed. "Alexander, you're falling for a street kid's clever act. How do we know she didn't overhear us talking about Ashley? Or maybe she saw her name somewhere in the house." "Catherine, enough," Alexander said, his voice firm. "Emma is staying here, at least for now. We need to figure out what's going on, and we won't get anywhere by throwing around accusations." Catherine's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Fine," she responded coldly, "but don't say I didn't warn you when this all blows up in your face." With that, she stormed out, leaving Alexander and Emma alone. Alexander knelt down to Emma's level, his heart aching at the fear and uncertainty in her eyes. "Emma, I'm so sorry about that. My sister. She can be difficult sometimes. But I promise you, you're safe here. We'll figure this out together. Okay?" Emma nodded, a small smile breaking through her worry. "Thank you, Mr. Alexander. You're very kind." As the days went by, Alexander grew increasingly attached to Emma. He was amazed by her resilience, her gentle nature, and the moments of humor that would occasionally emerge from her otherwise reserved demeanor. However, the stronger Alexander's bond with Emma became, the more Catherine's resentment grew. She watched as Alexander showered Emma with attention, taking her shopping for clothes, helping her with schoolwork, and even talking about enrolling her in a private school. With each passing day, her anger and jealousy only deepened. One evening, while Emma was asleep, Catherine confronted Alexander in his study. "This has gone on long enough, Alexander," she hissed. "You're being taken for a fool. That girl is not Ashley's daughter, and she's certainly not yours. She's a con artist, plain and simple." Alexander sighed, rubbing his temples. "Catherine, we've been over this. The resemblance is undeniable. And the brooch—" "The brooch proves nothing," Catherine interrupted. "For all we know, she could have stolen it. Have you even thought about getting a DNA test?" Alexander hesitated. The idea had crossed his mind, but a part of him feared the truth. What if Emma wasn't his daughter? What if the connection he felt was just wishful thinking? Sensing his hesitation, Catherine pressed on. "If you won't do it, I will. I'm not going to sit back and watch you ruin everything for a street kid's lies." With that, Catherine stormed out of the study, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts. But what Alexander didn't realize was that Catherine's plans were more drastic than a simple DNA test. The next morning, while Alexander was at work and Emma was engrossed in a book in the library, Catherine made a phone call. "Yes. Is this Child Protective Services? I'd like to report a case of potential child exploitation." Catherine's plan was simple, but potentially devastating. She intended to paint Alexander as an unhinged man who had taken in a child off the streets without following proper legal channels. She would insinuate that he might be grooming Emma for harmful purposes. It was a harsh lie, but Catherine believed she was protecting her brother and their family's name. As she hung up the phone, a pang of guilt shot through her. Am I really doing the right thing? But then she thought about their family's reputation and the potential scandal Alexander's actions could bring, and her resolve hardened. This is for the best, she told herself. Emma will be better off in the system, and Alexander will thank me when he sees reason. What Catherine didn't know was that Emma, curious about the hushed conversation, had crept to the door and overheard everything. Panic surged through Emma's chest. She had finally found a place where she felt safe, dared to hope for a family, and now it was all being torn away. Her mind raced. I can't go back to the streets. I can't end up in the system, she thought, fear gripping her. And more than anything, she couldn't stand the idea of leaving Alexander, who had shown her more kindness in days than she'd had in months on the streets. With tears in her eyes, Emma made a decision. She had to leave. It was the only way to protect Alexander from the trouble Catherine was causing, and the only way to keep from being taken away. Quickly and quietly, she gathered her few belongings, including the precious brooch, and slipped out of the mansion. As she stood at the gate looking back at the place that had felt like home, her heart ached. But she took a deep breath, turned, and vanished into the busy city streets. She was alone again, but she carried with her the memory of Alexander's kindness and the hope that somewhere out there, her father might be waiting for her. Unbeknownst to Emma, her disappearance would set off a series of events that would uncover buried secrets and test family bonds in ways no one could have predicted. As night fell, the mansion was in chaos. Alexander had returned home to find Emma missing, and the staff were searching every room. Alexander's voice shook with fear as he called the police. Meanwhile, Catherine watched, a mix of guilt and self-righteousness warring within her. She hadn't intended for Emma to run away. She had only wanted the girl removed through proper channels. Seeing her brother's distress, she began to doubt her actions. Alexander, Catherine said hesitantly, approaching her panicked brother. I need to tell you something. But before she could continue, a commotion at the front door interrupted them. A breathless servant rushed in. Mr. Alexander, we've found her. Emma's been seen at the old abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. Without hesitation, Alexander grabbed his car keys. I'm going to get her, he declared, determination in his voice. I'm coming with you, Catherine insisted, surprising both Alexander and herself. Maybe this was her chance to make things right. As they sped towards the factory, they didn't notice the small electrical fire beginning to smolder in the kitchen, a fire sparked by a faulty wire and fueled by the chaos of the evening. Meanwhile, in the rundown factory, Emma huddled in a corner, cold, scared, and already regretting her decision to run. The building creaked ominously, and shadows danced in the moonlight streaming through broken windows. Suddenly, she heard the sound of a car approaching. Peering out, she recognized Alexander's car pulling up, and her heart leapt with a mix of relief and fear. She longed to run to him to feel safe in his arms again. But the memory of Catherine's phone call held Emma back. As Alexander and Catherine entered the factory, calling her name, Emma pulled further into the shadows. She could hear the desperation in Alexander's voice, and the genuine concern made her second-guess her decision to run. Emma, please, where are you? It's okay, you're not in trouble. We just want you to come home. Alexander's voice echoed through the empty space. Torn between her fear and the longing for the safety Alexander represented, Emma stayed hidden, tears streaming silently down her face. Unbeknownst to them, back at the mansion, the small kitchen fire had turned into a massive blaze. The old wooden structure of the house fueled the flames, which spread rapidly. By the time the fire was noticed and the alarm raised, much of the lower floor was already consumed. At the factory, Alexander and Catherine's search was interrupted by the sharp ring of Alexander's cell phone. He answered, his expression turning pale as he listened to the frantic voice on the other end. The mansion's on fire, he said to Catherine, his voice hollow with shock. We need to go back now. His voice softened again. "It won't always be easy. We'll face challenges and tough times, but we'll face them together, as a family. That's what we are now, Emma. A family. You and me united not only by blood, but by love, by the choice to be together." He pulled Emma into a tight embrace. "I want you to know how incredibly proud I am of you, of your courage, your strength, and your kindness, even when the world wasn't kind to you. You are a miracle, Emma. My miracle. You saved me, my daughter. I owe you my life." As Alexander's words washed over her, Emma felt a warmth she had never known before. It was the warmth of belonging, of being truly, completely loved. In that moment, wrapped in her father's arms, Emma knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had finally, irrevocably, found her home. The weeks following the DNA test results were a whirlwind of change for Emma. The luxurious hotel suite they were staying in was soon replaced by a newly purchased penthouse apartment, which Alexander affectionately called their temporary home, until the mansion could be rebuilt. For Emma, who had spent months surviving on the streets, the opulence was overwhelming. Every day was filled with new experiences and challenges. Alexander enrolled Emma in an elite private school, determined to give her every opportunity he could. But for a girl who had missed months of education while living on the streets, the transition was anything but smooth. On her first day, she stood at the school gates, clutching her new backpack with trembling hands. As the other children arrived in luxury cars, their uniforms immaculate and their confidence evident, Emma felt like an outsider. Despite her new clothes, the weight of her past hung heavily on her small shoulders. "You'll be fine," Alexander reassured her, giving her hand a squeeze. "Just be yourself. You're smart and kind, and that's what really matters." But Emma quickly realized that being herself wasn't always enough in this new environment. The academic challenges were daunting. She struggled to keep up with the lessons, her educational gaps painfully obvious. Nights that she could have spent bonding with Alexander were instead filled with tears of frustration over homework she couldn't understand. Caught in the middle, Emma found herself having to speak with child psychologists, court-appointed guardians, and even the judge herself. Each time, she insisted that she wanted to stay with Alexander, but the court seemed determined to prioritize biological ties. One particularly difficult day, after a grueling session with a court-appointed psychologist, Emma overheard a heated argument between Alexander and Mike outside the ranch house. "She's my daughter, Alexander," Mike's voice carried on the wind. "I missed out on 8 years of her life. I'm not missing any more." "And whose fault is that?" Alexander retorted, his voice tight with anger. "Where were you when she was alone on the streets? I'm the one who's been there for her, who's given her a home, a family." "A family?" Mike scoffed. "You're not even related to her. I'm her real father." "Being a father is about more than DNA," Alexander shouted. "It's about love, sacrifice, and being there when it matters most." Emma couldn't bear to listen anymore. She retreated to her room, burying her face in her pillow to muffle her sobs. She loved Alexander, the man who had saved her and shown her what it meant to have a father. But she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward Mike, the connection of shared blood, and the possibility of learning more about her mother. As the court date loomed, the tension in the ranch house reached a breaking point. Alexander grew distant, spending long hours on calls with his legal team. Mike became increasingly insistent, trying to make up for lost time by spending every moment he could with Emma. The night before, they were due to return to the city for the final custody hearing. Emma lay in bed, unable to sleep. She crept out of her room and found both Alexander and Mike in the living room, each lost in their own thoughts. "I can't do this anymore," Emma said, breaking the silence. Both men turned to her, startled. "I love you both," Emma continued, tears spilling down her cheeks. "And I'm tearing you apart. Maybe it would be better if I just went back to the streets. Then neither of you would have to fight anymore." Both Alexander and Mike spoke at the same time. "No," they exclaimed, rushing to her side. Alexander knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Emma, sweetheart, don't ever think that. You are the most important thing in my life. I'm fighting because I love you, because I can't imagine my life without you." Mike, standing beside them, nodded. "Emma, I'm so sorry for everything you've had to go through, and I know all of this is overwhelming. But we're not fighting against you. We're fighting for you." Emma looked between the two men, feeling a mix of relief and pain. "But I don't want to choose," she whispered. "I don't want to lose either of you." Alexander pulled her into a hug. "And you don't have to choose. Whatever happens, I promise we'll work it out together." Mike joined in, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. "Your happiness and safety are what matter most. We'll find a way to make this work." In that moment, Emma felt the love and support of both men enveloping her, and she allowed herself to believe that somehow they would find a solution where no one had to lose. Mike placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "He's right, Emma. We're not fighting because of you. We're fighting for you. Because you deserve the best. You deserve to be loved and cared for." As Emma looked between the two men, both willing to fight for her, she felt a wave of love and gratitude. But beneath that, she felt a deep sadness, knowing that no matter how the court decided, someone she cared about would be hurt. "I just wish," Emma said softly, "I wish we could all just be a family together." Her words lingered in the room, a simple, hopeful wish from a child that seemed impossible in the midst of the legal battle ahead. But as Alexander and Mike exchanged a look over her head, something shifted between them, and the seed of an idea, crazy and improbable, began to take root. As they prepared to leave for the city the next morning, none of them could have predicted how Emma's innocent wish would ultimately reshape their future. The custody battle had weighed heavily on everyone, but it had taken the greatest toll on Alexander. As they returned to the city for the final hearing, Emma noticed her adoptive father looked paler than usual, with dark circles beneath his eyes. She assumed it was due to stress and sleepless nights, but the truth was far more serious. On the morning of the hearing, as they got ready to leave for the courthouse, Alexander suddenly collapsed in the kitchen. Emma's scream brought Mike running, and within minutes they were speeding to the hospital instead of the courthouse. The next few hours blurred together. White corridors, murmured conversations, and terrifying medical terminology. Finally, a doctor emerged from the emergency room to speak with them. "Mr. Hawthorne has suffered a minor heart attack," the doctor explained gently. "We've stabilized him, but we're concerned about the underlying cause. We've detected a heart condition that will require immediate attention and possibly surgery." Emma felt as if the floor had fallen out from under her. She turned to Mike, her eyes wide and filled with fear. "What's going to happen now?" she whispered. Mike, putting aside all other concerns, pulled Emma into a comforting embrace. "We'll get through this, Emma. Alexander is strong. He'll fight this." The custody hearing was postponed indefinitely as Alexander's health took priority. Emma refused to leave the hospital, setting up camp in the waiting room and sneaking into Alexander's room whenever the nurses allowed it. One evening, as she sat by his bedside, holding his hand and watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, he stirred and opened his eyes. "Emma," he said, his voice weak but full of love. "My brave girl." Emma's eyes welled up with tears. "Dad," she choked out, "I was so scared. Please don't leave me." Alexander squeezed her hand with all the strength he could muster. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I promise." Emma felt the weight lift from her chest, but fear still gripped her. "You need to get better, Dad. We have so much more to do together." Alexander gave her a small, tired smile. "I plan to, Emma. I plan to be there for everything. Your school plays, your birthdays, everything. We're not done making memories yet." Emma leaned down, hugging him as tightly as she could without hurting him. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. "And I love you, Emma," Alexander said, his voice barely above a whisper, but full of warmth. For the next several days, Emma stayed at Alexander's side, keeping him company and reading to him when he was awake. Mike, despite their custody battle, was always nearby, offering support and making sure Emma had everything she needed. In those moments, the legal fight seemed to dissolve, and the three of them formed a united front, focused solely on Alexander's recovery. One afternoon, Mike joined Emma at Alexander's bedside, his expression serious but kind. "I've been thinking," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "What you said about us all being a family, I think there's a way we can make that happen." Emma's heart fluttered with hope, and she listened as Mike explained his idea. It was unconventional, and it would require compromise from everyone, but for the first time, Emma felt that maybe, just maybe, her wish for a united family could become reality. As Alexander slowly recovered, the three of them discussed the plan. They agreed to share custody, ensuring that Emma could stay with both Alexander and Mike. It wouldn't be easy, but the love and commitment they had for her were strong enough to make it work. They filed a new agreement with the court, and this time it was a united request. Months later, when Alexander was fully recovered and the legal papers were finalized, Emma stood with both of her fathers in front of the judge. This time there was no tension, no hostility, just a unified sense of hope for the future. And as they left the courthouse, Emma held both of their hands, knowing that she didn't have to choose. She had both Alexander and Mike, and they were a family, together It'll take more than this to keep me from you." Over the next few weeks, as Alexander underwent tests and treatment, Emma's life centered around the hospital. She poured herself into caring for him, reading to him, helping with physical therapy exercises, and simply being by his side. Mike, seeing the depth of Emma's love for Alexander, began to reevaluate his stance on the custody battle. He saw how much strength Alexander drew from Emma's presence and how her love played a vital role in his recovery. One afternoon, while Emma dozed in a chair by Alexander's bed, Mike pulled Alexander aside for a serious conversation. "I've been thinking," Mike began hesitantly, "seeing Emma these past few weeks, how much she loves you and how much you mean to her. I realize I've been selfish." Alexander looked at Mike, surprised by his words. Mike continued, "I wanted Emma in my life so badly that I didn't stop to think about what was best for her. The truth is, you're her father in every way that matters. I want to drop the custody suit." Alexander was stunned. "Mike, are you sure? You have a legal right." "Legal rights don't always equate to what's right," Mike interrupted. "Emma needs you, and you need her. I see that now." As they talked, neither man noticed that Emma had woken up and was listening intently. Her heart swelled with love for both of them, for Mike's selflessness and for Alexander's unwavering love. "What if," Emma said, startling both men, "what if we could all be a family?" Alexander and Mike exchanged glances, then looked at Emma with matching expressions of surprise and consideration. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Alexander asked gently. Emma took a deep breath. "I love you, Dad. You're my father in every way that counts. But Mike, he's part of me too, and I'd like to get to know him better. Can't we find a way for all of us to be in each other's lives?" The room fell silent as the weight of Emma's words settled in. It was a childlike solution to an adult problem, but there was wisdom in its simplicity. Alexander reached out and took Emma's hand. "If that's what you want, Emma, we'll find a way to make it work." Mike nodded. "We'll try. For you, Emma." As Alexander's recovery progressed, so did their new unconventional family dynamic. Mike became a regular presence in their lives, not as a rival to Alexander, but as an additional source of support and love for Emma. The day Alexander was released from the hospital marked a new beginning for all of them. As they stepped out into the sunshine, Emma held Alexander's hand on one side and Mike's on the other. "You know," Alexander said, looking at Emma with a mixture of love and pride, "your mother would be so proud of you, Emma. You've brought us all together in a way I never thought possible." Emma beamed, feeling for the first time since leaving the streets that she truly belonged. She had not just one, but two fathers who loved her, and a future full of possibilities. As they drove home, Emma looked out the window at the city passing by. The streets that had once been her refuge now felt like a distant memory. She had faced abandonment, danger, and nearly losing the man she called Dad. But through it all, she had found something precious, a family built not just on blood, but on love, understanding, and the willingness to prioritize her needs. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but Emma knew that with her two fathers by her side, she could face anything. She was no longer the scared little girl crying in the rain. She was Emma Hawthorne Parker, loved, cherished, and finally, truly, home. The months following Alexander's release from the hospital were a time of healing and adjustment for everyone. The mansion, now fully rebuilt, symbolized their new beginning. Its halls, once cold and imposing, were now filled with laughter and the warmth of family. Alexander, Mike, and Emma worked together to create a unique family structure that honored all their relationships They established a co-parenting arrangement that allowed Emma to spend time with both fathers, ensuring she never felt torn between them again. Catherine, who had been a quiet supporter during Alexander's illness, fully embraced her role as Emma's aunt. She organized family dinners, planned outings, and became the glue that held their unconventional family together. One sunny afternoon, as they all gathered in the mansion's garden for a barbecue, Emma looked around at her family with a heart full of joy. Alexander was at the grill, playfully arguing with Mike about the best way to cook a steak, while Catherine set the table, humming softly. "Dad," Emma called out, her voice curious. "Do you think Mum would be happy to see us like this?" Alexander paused, a soft smile forming on his lips. "I'm sure she would, dear. She's probably looking out for us right now, with that beautiful smile you inherited." Mike nodded. "Your mother always wanted the best for everyone, Emma. I believe this miracle we've created is partly thanks to her. I think she watches over us wherever she is." Emma ran to hug both her fathers, burying her face between them. "I miss her, but I'm so happy to have both of you and Aunt Catherine now," she murmured. Catherine joined the embrace, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And we're so happy to have you, Emma. You've brought so much light into our lives." As they sat down to eat, Alexander raised his glass. "To family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just the one we're born into, but the one we choose and build together." "To family," everyone echoed, clinking their glasses. As the afternoon wore on, filled with laughter, shared stories, and the warmth of familial love, Emma felt a peace she had never known. She looked up at the blue sky, thinking of her mother and the incredible journey that had led her here. That night, as Alexander tucked Emma into bed, he smiled at the sight of Ashley's brooch carefully placed on the bedside table, one of the few possessions that had survived their tumultuous journey. "Good night, my love," he said, kissing Emma's forehead. "Good night, Dad," she replied sleepily. "I love you." "I love you too," Alexander said, his smile reaching his eyes. "More than you can imagine." As he closed Emma's bedroom door, Alexander knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together as a family. They had weathered storms, faced dangers, and overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. But through it all, love had triumphed. Emma, once a lost and lonely child, was now surrounded by more love than she had ever dreamed possible. And in that love, she had found her true home. Family is not defined by blood alone, but by the love, sacrifice, and commitment we choose to give one another. In life's darkest moments, it's not our circumstances that define us, but how we rise above them. Every child deserves love, every lost soul deserves a home, and every broken heart deserves a chance to heal. Sometimes, our greatest blessings come disguised as our biggest challenges. Remember, it's never too late to rewrite your story. The family you're born into may shape your beginning, but the family you choose shapes your forever. In the end, love is the most powerful force in the universe. It can bridge any gap, heal any wound, and create miracles out of the most unlikely situations. No matter how alone you may feel, there is always hope. Your true family might be just around the corner, waiting with open arms. All it takes is the courage to open your heart and the faith to believe in the power of love. In this journey called life, we are all in some way like Emma, searching for belonging, for understanding, for a place to call home. And like Emma, we each have the power to turn our pain into strength, our loneliness into love, and our broken pieces into a beautiful mosaic of family. So never give up.